Cole Harlan didn't stop for people anymore. He'd learned that the hard way. But something about the sound of a child screaming in the dirt made his horse slow without him asking. The boy wasn't crying. He was fighting, throwing his small body over a woman laid flat in the street, arms spread wide, refusing to let a single man touch her. "She's still warm," he screamed. "I can feel it." And every man in Redstone Creek just stood there, watching, doing nothing. If this story moves you, subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The woman had no name in this town anymore. That was the first thing Cole noticed when he rode into Redstone Creek just past noon on a Thursday in October of 1883. He'd passed through dozens of towns like this one, sun-beaten, dust-choked, held together by habit and fear more than any real sense of community. The kind of place where people looked away from trouble because looking meant choosing, and choosing meant consequences. He'd almost kept riding. Then he heard the boy. "Don't touch her! Don't you dare touch her!" The voice was high and raw and desperate in the way only a child's voice could be. Not the desperation of someone who'd given up, but someone fighting with everything left in them. Cole pulled his horse to a stop. He didn't climb down yet. He just watched. There were 6 men standing in a loose half-circle near the far end of the main street. 4 of them were holding shovels. 1 had a length of rope. The 6th, a heavy-set man with a sheriff's badge that caught the afternoon light, stood slightly apart with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed somewhere between the ground and the sky, like a man who'd made peace with something he hadn't earned the right to make peace with. In the center of all of them was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old, dusty brown hair, torn shirt, 1 boot missing. He was crouched over the body of a woman lying motionless in the street, arms spread wide, chin-up, eyes burning with a fury that had no business living in a face that young. "She's breathing," the boy said. "I know she is." The heavy-set man with the badge, Marshal Denton Hayes Cole, would learn later, let out a long, tired sigh. "Son," he said, "we've been through this. It's been 3 hours. We need to—" 3 hours don't mean nothing. The boy's voice cracked, but didn't break. "She talked to me, an hour ago. She said my name. She said Eli. I heard it." "You were scared," one of the men with shovels said, not unkindly. "Your mind plays tricks." "My mind wasn't playing tricks." Eli Calloway pressed both palms flat against his mother's chest and looked up at the circle of men around him. "She's still warm. You can feel it yourself if you'd just—" "Body stays warm a good while after," the marshal said. He wasn't cruel about it. That almost made it worse, the gentleness of a man delivering a verdict he'd already decided. "Now come on, Eli. Let us do what needs doing. Your mama wouldn't want—" "Don't tell me what my mama would want." The boy's voice turned to iron. "You didn't know her. None of you knew her." That landed. Cole saw it move through the men like a stone dropped in still water, a ripple of shame that each of them swallowed quickly and looked away from. He climbed down from his horse. Nobody paid him much attention. Strangers passed through Redstone Creek often enough that one more dusty man with a trail-worn coat and worn boots didn't cause much stir. Cole walked slowly, no urgency in his step, the way he'd learned to move in rooms full of loaded weapons and shorter fuses. He stopped at the edge of the half-circle between 2 of the men with shovels and looked down at the woman on the ground. Her name was Ruth Calloway. He didn't know that yet. What he saw was a woman in her late 30s, lean from hard work rather than hunger. Dark hair loose around her face, a schoolteacher's calloused fingers, and a mother's lines around her eyes. She was still. Her lips were slightly parted. Her dress was torn at one shoulder, and there was dried blood above her left temple where she'd struck the ground. Cole studied her face for a long moment. Something moved in his chest, quiet like the turn of a gear that hadn't moved in a long time. "How long she been down?" he asked. The marshal glanced at him. "Who are you?" "Just a man asking a question." Hayes measured him for a second, then let it go. "Since maybe 9 in the morning. It's noon now. 3.5 hours, the boy said sharp and fast, like he'd been keeping exact count. 3 hours and 27 minutes. Cole looked at the boy. Eli stared back with eyes that were wet, but not defeated, the eyes of someone who had decided something and hadn't been talked out of it yet. You said she spoke to you, Cole said. An hour ago. She said my name. Eli's jaw was set hard. She said Eli, clear as anything. He imagined it, one of the shovel men said behind Cole. Cole didn't turn around. Maybe, he said. Maybe not. He crouched down onto one knee in the dirt beside Ruth Calloway, slow and deliberate, and felt the air in the half-circle shift. The men with shovels went still. The marshal took one step forward, then stopped. Mister, Hayes said carefully. There's no need to. Won't take but a moment, Cole said. He reached out and placed 2 fingers against Ruth's neck. Not dramatic, not rough, just steady and careful the way a man does when he already knows how to do this, and doesn't need to perform it. He held still, closed his eyes slightly, breathed out through his nose. The boy didn't breathe at all. Every man in that half-circle held their breath too, though most of them couldn't have said why. There was something about the stillness of Cole Harlan when he was paying attention that made the air around him go quiet. Then his fingers stopped moving. He didn't say anything for a full 3 seconds. Well, the marshal said. Cole opened his eyes. He didn't look at Hayes. He looked at Eli. You were right, he said. The world stopped. Eli made a sound he'd spend the rest of his life trying to describe, not a word, not a cry, something in between, something that a 9-year-old boy makes when the ground comes back under his feet after 3 hours of freefall. What? Hayes stepped forward now fast. What do you mean? I mean she has a pulse. Cole stood up and his voice changed, no longer quiet, no longer unhurried. It's faint, it's weak, but it's there. He turned and looked at the men with shovels and let the silence do what words couldn't. Somebody get water. Clean water, not that ditch runoff. And I need cloth, anything clean. Now. Nobody moved. Cole looked at them one by one, unhurried. She is alive, he said slower this time, like he was speaking to men who'd forgotten how to hear. And every second you stand there is a second she doesn't have. So I'm going to ask one more time. Is there a man here who's going to help, or am I doing this alone? Something broke loose in the half-circle. One of the shovel men dropped his shovel and turned and ran toward the general store. Another followed. Hayes rubbed his jaw and looked at the ground and said, Lord Almighty, under his breath. And even that small thing, the sound of a man who thought he'd made peace having that peace pulled out from under him, told Cole everything he needed to know about Redstone Creek. Eli was already leaning over his mother. Mama, he said softly. Mama, I told them, and they didn't believe me, but I didn't let them, and now... He stopped, pressed his forehead to the back of her hand, breathed. Cole knelt down again across from the boy. He kept his voice low the way he always did when things were fragile. What's your name, son? Eli. A pause. Eli Calloway. Eli. Cole looked at the woman. She your mother? Yes, sir. What happened to her? Eli didn't answer right away. His jaw moved like he was chewing on something bitter. His eyes cut sideways, not at Cole, but at the men still standing nearby. Hayes. 2 others who hadn't moved yet. Cole noticed the look, filed it away. Men came last night, Eli said finally, his voice dropping low enough that only Cole could hear it clearly. 3 of them. Came to the house. What did they want? Money. Eli swallowed. Said we owed it. Said my mama had borrowed from Mr. Pickett's fund and the note was due. But we never borrowed nothing. My mama, she taught school. She didn't take loans from nobody. Cole's expression didn't change. What happened when she told them that? She showed them papers. She had papers, the ledger from the school, her own record of everything. She showed them right there at the door. Eli's hands curled into fists on his knees. And one of them, the tall one, the one with the gray hat, he took the papers right out of her hands and tore them. He stopped. His throat worked. And then he pushed her. He pushed her. Hard. Eli looked at his mother's face. She went backward into the porch post, hit the side of her head. She fell, and she didn't get back up. His voice had gone completely flat, the way a child's voice goes when they've told a terrible thing so many times in their head that telling it out loud has gone numb. I tried to wake her up all night. She'd say things sometimes, little things, but she wouldn't open her eyes. And in the morning, people came, and they said, Eli stopped. His eyes went to the ground. Then back up to Cole, steady and furious, and 9 years old and unbreakable. They said she was gone, and I said she wasn't. And they said I was just a scared little boy who didn't understand, and I said I didn't care what they said, she was still warm and she was still breathing, and I wasn't going to let them put her in the ground. He set his jaw. So I didn't. Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, No, you didn't. Something moved across Eli's face. Relief and grief and exhaustion, all tangled up together. The look of someone who has been strong for so long that being believed feels almost too big to hold. The man from the general store came back at a run with a bucket and a folded length of clean linen. Cole took it without ceremony and went to work. He kept his hands steady and his voice even, and he talked to Eli while he worked, not explaining everything, just talking the way a man does when he wants someone else to stay present and not drift into shock. Your mama, she teach school here in town? He asked. Yes, sir. 4 years. Before that, we were in Abilene. Eli watched Cole's hands move with the damp cloth against his mother's forehead. She started the school herself. Wasn't one when we got here. She wrote to the county, and they said there wasn't money, so she used our own. A beat. She charged families that could pay and let the ones that couldn't pay come anyway. Sounds like a determined woman. She is. Eli corrected the tense automatically, fiercely. Present tense, not past. Cole noted it. Who's Ford Pickett? Cole asked, keeping his voice easy. He felt the change in Eli more than he saw it, a subtle stiffening, like a small animal that's heard a sound it recognizes. He owns land, Eli said carefully. Most of the land north of town, and the mill, and the water rights on the creek. A pause. And the bank. Busy man. He says he built this town. Eli's voice carried something older than contempt. Everybody lets him say it. Cole looked over his shoulder at Marshal Hayes, who was standing 6 feet back, with his arms still crossed, and his eyes fixed somewhere that wasn't Cole, or the boy, or the woman on the ground. A man trying to be invisible without moving. Marshal, Cole said. Hayes looked up. You know who did this. Hayes opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. There'll be an investigation. That ain't what I asked. The silence was long and heavy and spoke clearly. Hayes looked away first. Cole turned back to Ruth. Her breathing was shallow still, but it was there. He could see the slight rise and fall of her chest now, if he knew where to look. He'd seen men take blows to the head worse than this, and come back talking. He'd seen them take lighter ones and not come back at all. He didn't say either of those things out loud. Eli, he said, is there anyone in this town who looks out for your family? A neighbor, a friend of your mother's? Somebody who... Mrs. Agnes Porter, Eli said immediately. She runs the boarding house on the south end. She used to bring us soup in the winter when the school didn't bring in enough. He hesitated. She didn't come today. I saw her watching from her window. But she didn't come out. Cole absorbed that. Anyone else? Eli thought. Reverend Michaels. But he left town 2 weeks ago. Nobody said why. A beat. Right after he preached a sermon about false witness. The corners of Cole's mouth moved almost. That right? Yes, sir. Cole finished what he could do in the street, which wasn't enough, but was more than nothing, and sat back on his heels and looked at the woman, and then at the boy, and thought about the 17 reasons he had to ride on. He was a man with no attachment to Redstone Creek, and no stake in its particular arrangement of fear and silence. He was tired and low on money, and 3 days out from the next town with work. He thought about all of that. And then Eli spoke. "Mister," the boy said quietly, "are you going to stay?" Cole didn't answer right away. "You're the only one who checked," Eli said. "Everybody else they knew what they were going to find before they looked. You actually checked." A beat. That means something. Cole looked at the boy's face, at the exhaustion under the defiance, at the way he was holding himself together with nothing but will and love, and 3 hours of refusing to let go. He thought about another boy in another town a long time ago who had needed someone to stay and found no one. "She needs to be moved inside," Cole said. "Somewhere warm out of the sun. She needs rest and watching, and someone who knows what they're doing with a head injury." He looked up at Hayes, who was still nearby, still silent. "Marshall, is there a doctor in this town?" Hayes rubbed the back of his neck. "Doc Reiner left 6 months ago." "Left or was run off?" The silence answered. Cole stood up. He was not a tall man, but he stood the way tall men sometimes forgot to, like the ground under him was his and the air around him cost something. He looked at the men still standing with their shovels. Then he looked at Hayes. "Then I reckon someone's going to have to do," he said. "You going to help me carry her, Marshall, or are you going to stand there and let a 9-year-old boy shame you twice in one afternoon?" Something moved behind Hayes's eyes. Not courage yet, not quite, but the beginning of it. The memory of what courage used to feel like. He uncrossed his arms, took a step forward. "All right," he said, low and rough. "All right." Between the two of them, they lifted Ruth Calloway carefully. Cole at her shoulders, Hayes at her feet, and Eli walked beside her the whole way, one hand resting on his mother's arm, talking to her in a low, steady voice. "We're going inside, Mama. You're safe. I'm right here. I didn't let them. I told you I wouldn't." Cole listened to the boy talk to his mother and kept his face neutral and his eyes forward, but something in his chest had gone very quiet and very still and very certain. They laid Ruth on the cot in the back room of Agnes Porter's boarding house, because when Eli said her name out loud in the street, the window on the south end had opened, and Agnes Porter, stout, sharp-eyed, 65 years old, had called down, "Bring her here, bring her in," and then added lower, like she was ashamed of every moment between the morning and this one, "Bring her in right now." Agnes met them at the door. She didn't speak for a moment when she saw Ruth's face. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes went bright and hard. Then she stepped back and said, "This way," in a voice that didn't leave room for argument. Cole laid Ruth down and stepped back and let Agnes take over, because Agnes Porter was the kind of woman who knew exactly what to do and did it without asking anyone's permission, and Redstone Creek had been poorer for forgetting that. Eli sat on the floor beside the cot and held his mother's hand. Cole stood by the door. He could leave now. He told himself that. He'd done what could be done. The woman was alive inside with someone watching her. His part was finished. He was a man passing through. He didn't move. Agnes caught his eye across the room. She was pressing a cool cloth to Ruth's temple, steady and practiced. She looked at him with the look of a woman who has outlived enough nonsense to see straight to the truth of things. "You staying?" she asked. Cole looked at the boy on the floor, at the woman on the cot, breathing faint, fragile reel, at the window where through the glass he could see the empty main street of Redstone Creek, settling back into its silence like nothing had happened, like a woman hadn't nearly been buried alive, like a child hadn't fought 6 men alone for 3.5 hours, like it was just another Thursday. "Yeah," Cole said. He took his hat off and held it in both hands. I reckon I am. And that's when they heard the horses. Not one, not two. A group of them coming from the north road, riding fast and not bothering to slow. The sound of men who were used to arriving in a place and having it rearrange itself around them. Eli's head came up. His hand tightened around his mother's. He looked at Cole with eyes that already knew. They said they'd come back, he said quietly. The men from last night. They said they'd come back for what they were owed. He swallowed. They said if Mama couldn't pay, they'd take me instead. The room went cold. Cole set his jaw, put his hat back on, adjusted the brim once deliberate and slow. How many? He asked. Eli closed his eyes, remembering the night before. 3, he said. But they don't come anywhere without the others. There's always more. Cole walked to the window, looked out at the north road, counted. 5 riders. He breathed out through his nose, long and slow, cracked his knuckles once against the window frame. Behind him, Agnes Porter said very quietly, Lord help us. Cole turned from the window and looked at Eli, at the boy who had held on for 3 hours in the dirt and refused to let go of something every grown man around him had already given up on. Stay with your mama, Cole said. Don't come outside. Whatever you hear, don't come outside. Are you going out there? Eli asked. Cole picked up his coat from the chair where he'd set it, shrugged it on, settled it across his shoulders the way a man settles something that has weight and meaning and belongs exactly where it is. Yes, he said. Why? Eli asked. Not challenging. Not a child testing a stranger. A genuine question, the kind that deserves a genuine answer. You don't know us. You don't owe us nothing. Cole looked at him for a long moment. Because somebody should have done it this morning, he said. And nobody did. He walked out the door. Cole stepped off the porch of Agnes Porter's boarding house and into the middle of the street and stopped walking. That was it. That was all he did. He stopped walking and stood still and let the 5 riders come to him, which they did, slowing from a hard ride to a trot, to a walk as they entered the main stretch of Redstone Creek, their horses blowing hard and their eyes already scanning, already counting, already looking for what they expected to find, which was nothing that could stop them. They found Cole Harlan instead. The man in front was the one Eli had described, tall in the saddle-gray hat, the kind of lean and angular that comes not from hard work, but from a certain type of cold living. His name was Deke Morrow, though Cole didn't know that yet. What Cole knew was the way he rode loose and easy, one hand on the reins and the other resting on his thigh within reach of the iron on his hip, and the way his eyes moved across the street without settling on anything, because in his experience there was never anything worth settling on. Those eyes found Cole, and settled. The 5 horses stopped. Deke Morrow looked down at Cole the way a man looks at something unexpected, but not yet concerning. He took his time, let the silence ride between them like a third party. You're in the road, Deke said. I am, Cole said. You might want to step out of it. I might, Cole said. I'm going to stand here a while first. Behind Deke, 2 of the other riders exchanged a glance. The kind of glance that passes between men who have done this particular thing many times and recognize the beginning of it. One of them, young, maybe 22, with a patchy beard and restless hands, shifted in his saddle. Deke leaned forward slightly on his pommel. You know who I work for? I know what you did last night, Cole said. Something moved in Deke's face. Not guilt, not surprise exactly. More like recalculation, the quiet adjustment of a man who had arrived expecting one kind of problem and found a different kind. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. Woman named Ruth Calloway, Cole said. School teacher. You came to her house. You said she owed a debt she doesn't owe. She showed you papers proving it and you tore them out of her hands. Then you put her on the ground hard enough that she didn't get up. He let that land. Her boy watched the whole thing. Deke straightened. Woman had a debt. She fell. Accidents happen when people don't settle what they owe. She didn't owe anything. That ain't for you to say. Mr. Pickett's records say different from hers, I imagine, Cole said. That's convenient for Mr. Pickett. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into water, and the ripples went everywhere immediately. The young writer with the patchy beard stopped shifting. The two on the far right went very still. Deke's jaw tightened by a fraction, which on a face that controlled was the equivalent of flinching. You want to be careful, Deke said, throwing names around in a town you just rode into. I've been careful a long time, Cole said. Gets exhausting. Down the street, Cole was aware without looking that doors had opened. Not wide, not the open doors of people stepping out to help. The cracked doors of people watching from safety. Marshal Hayes was somewhere behind and to his left. Cole had placed him when he stepped off the porch. The marshal hadn't moved yet, which told Cole everything about Hayes that he needed to know for right now, though not necessarily everything about what Hayes might do later. Deke swung down from his horse. Slowly, deliberately, the same performance of ease that Cole had used walking into the half-circle earlier. The communication of a man who is not afraid because he has never had reason to be. He handed his reins to the rider beside him and walked forward 3 steps and stopped. We're here for the boy, he said. Low now. Not for the street. Just for Cole. Woman can't pay the boy, works it off. That's the arrangement Mr. Pickett makes when families can't meet their notes. Cole felt something shift in his chest, cold and deliberate, like a door closing. That boy is 9 years old. Old enough to work. Old enough to work a debt his mother doesn't owe for a man she never borrowed from. Cole's voice stayed flat. That was the dangerous kind of flat, not the flatness of a man who didn't feel anything, but of a man who felt it, and had put it somewhere very contained and very close to the surface. You hear yourself. I hear a drifter who's about to make a very poor decision, Deke said. Wouldn't be my first. Deke looked at him, really looked the way men look at each other when they're measuring not size, but something less visible. He looked at Cole's hands, which were loose at his sides. He looked at Cole's eyes, which were steady. He looked at the way Cole was standing, which was the way a man stands when he has nowhere he's trying to get to, and nothing he's trying to protect except the ground he's already on. Step aside, Deke said. No, Cole said. Simple. Final. The same word he'd said before to different men in different towns, and it always sounded like the last word of a conversation, because it usually was. Deke breathed out through his nose, looked past Cole toward the boarding house. Something in his expression shifted a decision made. He half-turned back to his riders and gave a short nod, the kind that means spread out, which 2 of them moved to do. Don't, Cole said. The 2 riders stopped. Cole hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved his hands, hadn't done anything visible. But something in the single word stopped both men cold. There was something in the quality of Cole Harlan's stillness in that moment. Something that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with absolute certainty that communicated itself across the street without any assistance. Deke turned back slowly. His eyes had changed. You're one man, he said. I've heard that, Cole said. There are 5 of us. I can count. Then you know how this ends. Cole looked at him. I know how everything ends eventually, he said. What I'm interested in is how today ends. And today, you're going to ride back up that North Road and tell Ford Pickett that Ruth Calloway doesn't owe him a cent, that her son isn't going anywhere, and that the next man who comes to that schoolteacher's house uninvited is going to have a longer conversation with me than he'd like. Deke laughed. It was a short sound, not warm. And if we don't... Cole didn't answer. Deke's hand moved. Fast, and without announcement, the way a man moves when he's decided the conversation is done. His fingers dropped toward his hip. Cole was faster. The draw was not dramatic. It was not slow. It was the movement of a man who had done this enough times that the motion had gone past muscle memory into something deeper, bone memory. Some men called it The gun was in Cole's hand and leveled at Deke Morrow before Deke's iron was free of leather and the 4 remaining riders went statue still on their horses, and the sound of the street absorbed everything else. Nobody moved. Deke Morrow stood with his hand half wrapped around the grip of a gun he hadn't finished drawing, looking down the barrel of Cole's revolver, and for the first time in what was probably a long time, something very close to fear crossed his face. "Let it go," Cole said quietly. A beat. 2. Deke's gun dropped back into the holster. Cole didn't lower his weapon. He looked past Deke at the 4 riders. "You two. All of it. On the ground." When nobody moved fast enough, he said again without raising his voice, "Now would be the time, gentlemen." One gun hit the dirt. Then another. Then the last 2, slower, reluctant, the sound of men who were calculating and coming up with the same answer. The street was very quiet. Cole lowered his gun but didn't holster it. Deke Morrow stood in the middle of the road with his jaw set and his eyes burning, and the look of a man who had just been publicly measured and found something he hadn't expected. It wasn't humiliation yet. It was worse than humiliation. It was uncertainty, and Deke Morrow was a man who had not been uncertain in a long time. "This ain't finished," he said. "It is for today," Cole said. "Pickett will hear about this." "Good," Cole said. "Tell him what I said, word for word." Deke held his gaze for a long 3 seconds. Then he turned, walked back to his horse, took the reins, and mounted. He looked down at Cole one more time from the saddle. "You don't know this town," he said. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know enough," Cole said. Deke pulled his horse around. The others followed. They rode back up the north road at a walk. Not fleeing Deke would not allow fleeing but leaving, and that was enough. Cole watched them until they turned out of sight past the tree line. Then he looked down at the guns in the dirt, and then he looked up at the cracked doors along the main street of Redstone Creek. One by one they closed. Cole stood there in the street alone. He turned and walked back to Agnes Porter's boarding house and went inside. Agnes was standing at the window. She had watched the whole thing. She looked at Cole when he came in with the expression of a woman who had been expecting the worst and received something else and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. "That was either very brave or very foolish," she said. "Probably both, ma'am," Cole said. Eli was on his feet. He had not stayed on the floor beside the cot. He was standing just inside the doorway with his arms stiff at his sides and his face arranged into an expression of 7 different things at once. Relief and fear, and a hot, bright something that might have been gratitude, or might have been the beginning of a kind of faith, the kind a boy builds when a person does what they said they would do. "You're back," Eli said. "I said I would be," Cole said. He moved past the boy to the cot and checked Ruth. Her color was slightly better. Her breathing had steadied into something less frightening. He put the back of his hand against her forehead and then looked at Agnes. "She needs a doctor," he said. "Closest one is 30 miles south in Millhaven," Agnes said. She had her arms folded across her chest, not in judgment, but in the posture of a woman carrying something heavy she refused to put down. "Doc Reiner's replacement hasn't been approved by the county yet, or so they say." Her voice clipped the last 3 words with precision, communicating exactly what she thought of what the county said and why they might say it. "Someone's going to have to ride to Millhaven," Cole said. "Deke Morrow and those others will be back by morning," Agnes said. "Probably with more. And once Pickett knows what happened out there." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I've lived in this town 11 years. I've watched Ford Pickett push people out one by one. The Reverend, the doctor, anyone who didn't make his life easier." She looked at Cole steadily. "He won't let this go. Not a public thing like that." "No," Cole agreed. "He won't." "Then what are you going to do?" she asked. Not with heat, not with expectation, just asking the way a practical woman asks when she needs information to make decisions. Cole pulled a chair close to the cot and sat down. He looked at Ruth Calloway's face. "There's something I need to know," he said, and then he looked at Agnes. "You said she kept her own records, the school ledger, records of every family, what they paid, what they contributed." "She kept everything," Agnes said. Ruth was meticulous. She had to be. When you're a woman running an institution in a town like this, you can't afford to be anything but meticulous. "Do you know where she kept her records?" Agnes looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. She had started thinking 2 steps ahead, which told Cole she was the right kind of woman for this particular moment. "Her house," she said. "There's a locked box she kept under the floorboard in the main room. I helped her hide it last spring after the first time Pickett's men came by with questions about the school finances." Cole looked at her. She was scared of them even then. "She was careful," Agnes corrected. "There's a difference. Ruth Calloway wasn't scared of much, but she was careful enough to know that a woman alone with a child and a school she'd built from nothing was only as safe as the records proving she'd done everything right." She paused. "Those records are proof. Proof that she never borrowed. Proof of what this town actually owes her in real numbers, the families she taught, the work she did, that the county should have funded and didn't." Agnes's voice had gone steady and iron quiet. "If someone could get those records to the right people—" "The county seat," Cole said. "It's 2 days' ride." "Then someone should start tonight." Agnes looked at him. "You'd do that? Ride to the county seat?" "Not me," Cole said. "I'm staying here." He had said it before he entirely decided it, but once it was said it was true, and he knew it. He looked at Eli, who was listening from the doorway, with the particular attention of a child, who has learned that adult conversations contain information he is not supposed to hear, but desperately needs. "Is there anyone in this town who still has their spine?" Cole asked Agnes. "Someone Pickett hasn't bought or broken," Agnes thought. Her thinking was deliberate and unhurried, the kind that counts on its fingers internally. "Tom Briggs," she said finally, "runs the feed store. He's been paying Pickett's rates for 3 years and hasn't moved out because this is his father's land and he's not the moving kind." She thought more. "And the Yates brothers, they farm the East Flat. They've had 2 bad seasons and Pickett offered to buy them out for less than the land's worth both times, and they said no both times." A beat. "They're angry enough." "Angry men are useful," Cole said, "when they've got something to be angry about that they can finally say out loud." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "If Ruth's records go to the county and a formal complaint is filed, Pickett loses his legal cover. Everything he's done here, the forced debts, the runoff doctor, the reverend, it all starts looking like what it is." "And in the meantime," Agnes asked, "he has men, armed men, and the marshal is about as useful as a—" She stopped herself, closed her eyes briefly. "Hayes is not a bad man," she said more carefully. "He used to be a good one. He's just been standing in the cold so long he forgot what warmth felt like." Cole thought about Hayes, about the look on the marshal's face when Cole had asked him point blank whether he knew who'd hurt Ruth, and Hayes had opened his mouth and closed it like a man swallowing his own answer. About the single step Hayes had taken forward when Cole challenged him to help carry Ruth inside. The step before the stopping. The wanting to, without the doing. There were men who were corrupted and men who were simply afraid, and they looked the same from a distance, but they weren't the same up close, and it mattered what kind Hayes was, because it determined whether he could still be reached. "I'm going to go talk to the marshal," Cole said. He stood. He looked at Agnes. "Don't let anyone in this door that you don't know. And if anything—" "I know how to use a shotgun," Agnes said flatly. "I've lived alone for 19 years. I know how to do several things people assume I don't." Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am. I believe you do." He looked at Eli last. The boy had not moved from the doorway. His eyes were on his mother, the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest, the small private miracle of her continued breathing, and then they moved to Cole. "She's going to wake up," Cole said. He said it the way he said things that mattered, not as comfort, not as performance, but as statement of fact, in the voice of a man who chose his statements carefully enough that they meant something. "She's strong. You can see it in her." Eli looked at his mother, then back at Cole. "How do you know what strong looks like?" he asked. Cole put his hat on, adjusted the brim once. "Same way you do," he said. "You fought 6 men in the middle of a street for 3.5 hours to protect her. You know exactly what strong looks like." He paused at the door. "Sit with her. Talk to her. People hear more than we think even when they can't answer." He went out. The street had resettled into its silence again, as streets like this always did. That was the thing about towns under the weight of men like Ford Pickett. The silence recovered fast because it had so much practice. Cole walked the length of the main street, slowly reading it the way a man reads a room. The feed store, the general store, the shuttered building that had probably been the doctor's office, the church with its doors closed on a Thursday afternoon. He found Marshall Hayes sitting on the bench outside his office, with his hat off, and his forearms on his knees, and his eyes on the ground between his boots. The pose of a man having a serious conversation with himself. Cole sat down beside him without invitation. Hayes didn't look up. "You run them off," he said. It wasn't a question. "For today," Cole said. Hayes rubbed his face with both hands. He was older up close than he'd looked across the street, not in years, but in the other ways men age the ways that have nothing to do with time. "You know they'll come back with more," he said. "I know." "Pickett won't stand for being embarrassed." "He shouldn't have started something embarrassing," Cole said. Hayes was quiet for a moment. "What do you want from me?" he asked, blunt and honest in a way that surprised Cole slightly, the directness of a man too tired for anything else. "The truth," Cole said. "You know what Pickett's doing in this town. You've known for a while. I want to know how long, and I want to know if there's anything in your office, any record, any complaint that was filed and buried, anything that puts his name on what's been happening here, that you'd be willing to share with a county official." Hayes looked up at him for the first time. His eyes were tired and brown and complicated. "You're asking me to go against Ford Pickett," he said. "I'm asking you to do what you were hired to do," Cole said. "Which I think you remember, even if it's been a while." The words sat between them. Hayes looked back at the ground. His jaw worked. The afternoon light was going golden and long the way it did in October in that part of Texas, filling everything with a warmth that the day hadn't quite earned. "There were 3 complaints," Hayes said finally, very quietly. "Families who said Pickett's men had threatened them. Threatened to burn crops. One family said their barn actually was burned. I wrote them up." He stopped. "Pickett came to see me, privately. He said the county needed men like him to maintain order in developing territories. He said a marshal who didn't understand that wouldn't last long." Hayes turned his hat in his hands. "I was afraid." "I know," Cole said. He didn't say it with contempt. He said it the way a man says something true when the truth isn't unkind. "I've got a daughter in Austin," Hayes said. "She's got 2 children. She doesn't know what I've let happen here." His voice went rough. "If she knew." "She doesn't know yet," Cole said. "What you do tonight is a different thing from what you did before. It doesn't erase it, but it's different." He looked at Hayes directly. "Where are those complaint files?" Hayes was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Cole thought he'd lost him, thought the fear had reclosed over the man, like water closing over a stone. Then Hayes said slowly, and with the weight of a man lifting something he'd set down a long time ago. Back of the filing cabinet, bottom drawer, under a ledger of horse licensing from 1879. Cole exhaled once. "All right," he said. "All right. What are you going to do?" Cole stood, put his hat back on, looked up the north road where the dust from Deke Morrow's departure had long since settled. "I'm going to make sure Ruth Calloway wakes up to a town that's worth waking up in," he said, "whether this town wants to be that or not." Hayes sat with that for a moment. Then very slowly, he stood up too. He was not a small man when he stood up. He'd forgotten that about himself. "I'll get the files," he said. Cole nodded once. He turned and walked back up the street, and the sun was sitting low and red on the horizon behind him, and somewhere inside Agnes Porter's boarding house, a 9-year-old boy was sitting beside his mother's cot, talking to her in a low voice about everything and nothing, the way you talk to someone you refuse to lose. And somewhere up the North Road, Ford Pickett was receiving a report he had not expected and making plans of his own. The night was coming, and Redstone Creek was going to have to decide what it was before morning. The files were real. Hayes pulled them from the bottom drawer of his cabinet with the careful hands of a man handling something that had been buried long enough to feel dangerous just by being touched. 3 folders thin but substantial, the kind of thin that comes not from lack of content, but from someone having made sure they stayed hidden. He set them on the desk in front of Cole without ceremony, without explanation, and then stepped back and put his hands in his pockets and looked at the wall while Cole read. It took Cole 20 minutes to go through everything. He read slowly and thoroughly the way a man reads when he knows he's only going to get one look at something and needs to carry it with him afterward. The complaints were written in Hayes's own hand. Careful, precise, the handwriting of a man who had once taken his work seriously. 3 families. 3 separate incidents spanning 14 months. Threats, property destruction. 1 barn fire that Hayes had investigated and documented with more detail than Cole had expected, including the names of 2 witnesses who had seen Pickett's men ride away from the property that night. "These witnesses," Cole said. "They still in town?" Hayes turned from the wall. "The Garfield family left 8 months ago, packed up and went to Colorado." He paused. "The other one is Tom Briggs." Cole looked up. Agnes had said the same name. Feed store, father's land, not the moving kind. "He never recanted?" Cole asked. "Pickett came to him," Hayes said. "I know that much. Tom didn't tell me what was said, but he stopped coming around the office after." Hayes's jaw moved. "He still testified in the file, though. In writing. That's still there." Cole closed the last folder and sat back and thought. The night had come down fully outside the office window, and the oil lamp on Hayes's desk threw a circle of yellow light that made everything outside it feel very far away. Somewhere in the middle distance, a horse moved. Cole tracked the sound without looking up, cataloged it, let it go, just a livery horse shifting in its stall. "I need someone to ride to the county seat," Cole said. "Tonight." Hayes absorbed that. "The county seat is Judge Warren Aldis," he said. "He's not a corrupt man, but he is a careful one. He won't move on Pickett without solid documentation and a formal complaint from a resident. Then he'll get both." Cole tapped the 3 folders. These complaints were never officially forwarded to the county. They were filed locally and buried. That itself is a problem for someone, and that someone is Ford Pickett. He looked at Hayes. "Ruth Calloway's records from the school. The real records, the ones proving she never borrowed from Pickett's fund. They're at her house under the floorboard in the main room. Combined with a sworn statement from Tom Briggs, Aldis will have enough to open an investigation. And an open investigation means Pickett can't move openly without making everything worse for himself." Hayes was very still. "You're talking about stripping him of his protection." "I'm talking about giving the law a reason to do what it's supposed to do," Cole said. "If Pickett finds out a rider went to the county seat before the documents get there, then the rider goes tonight," Cole said. Quietly, before Pickett's had time to plan anything beyond what he's already planning. He looked at Hayes directly. "Who do you trust enough to send?" Hayes didn't answer right away. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark street, and Cole could see in the set of his shoulders the particular struggle of a man trying to remember what he believed about people after a long period of believing very little. "My deputy," he said finally. "Jesse Carr. He's 24 years old, and he has never in his life been able to keep his opinions to himself, which is why Pickett's never tried to buy him too much trouble for too little reliability. He's been riding for me 3 years. Hayes paused. "He deserves better than what I've shown him." "Then send him," Cole said. "Tonight, with these files, and with a letter from you, official correspondence from the marshal's office, requesting a county investigation on the grounds of suppressed complaints and evidence of systematic intimidation." He held Hayes's gaze. "You sign it, your name, your title." The weight of that request sat in the room. Hayes turned from the window. In the lamplight, he looked older and younger than he had at the same time. Older in the face, younger in the eyes, the way a man looks when he's made a decision that costs something real. "All right," he said. "All right, I'll write it now." Cole left him writing and went out into the night. The boarding house was 2 minutes' walk. When he came in, Agnes was sitting in the chair by the window with her shotgun across her lap, not brandishing it, just keeping it company the way a practical woman keeps useful things close. She looked at Cole when he entered and said nothing, which meant things were the same, which meant Ruth was still breathing, and Eli was still there, and the world had held its shape for another hour. Cole sat down across from Agnes and kept his voice low. "I need to get into Ruth's house," he said. "Tonight. There's a locked box under the floorboard." Agnes studied him. "It'll be watched," she said. "If Pickett's as prepared as you think, he'll have a man on the house by now." "Probably," Cole said. "How many ways in? Front door, back door, and a window in the lean-to on the east side that Ruth kept meaning to fix the latch on." Agnes allowed herself a small, dry expression. "She told me about it 6 months ago. Said she kept forgetting." "East side," Cole said. "All right." He stood. "You're going now," Agnes said. "Best time," Cole said. "Before they've fully organized. Right now, Deke Morrow is reporting back to Pickett, and Pickett is listening and deciding. That takes time. Men, like Pickett, are thorough. They don't rush a plan because they're not used to having to." He picked up his hat. "That's a window." Agnes looked at him for a long moment in that direct, measuring way. She had the look of a woman who had spent 65 years developing an accurate sense of what people were made of. "You were a lawman," she said. "Not a question." Cole paused. "Used to be." "What happened?" He settled his hat on his head. "I did my job exactly right," he said. "And it wasn't enough. And then I stopped doing it, and that wasn't enough either." He looked at her steadily. "I'm still working out what enough looks like." Agnes held his gaze for one more moment. Then she nodded once, a nod that meant she'd heard him, and it was sufficient, and she'd ask no more. "The box has a brass clasp," she said. "Small key on a cord Ruth wears around her neck, but the clasp is old. You can work the hinge loose from the other side if you're patient." "I'll be patient," Cole said. He moved toward the door, then stopped. "How's she doing?" Agnes's expression softened just slightly, just enough. "Her breathing is steadier. She moved her hand an hour ago on her own, reaching toward Eli." She paused. He didn't notice. He was asleep beside her on the floor finally. "I didn't wake him." Cole stood in the doorway and absorbed that the image of the boy finally letting himself sleep, still close enough to touch his mother's hand even unconscious. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good." He went out through the back of Agnes's boarding house and moved through the dark town in a long arc that kept him away from the main street, reading the night, the way years of difficult work had taught him to read it. Which sounds were people, which were animals, which were wind, which were the particular quality of silence that meant someone nearby was trying hard not to make a sound. He found the man watching Ruth's house without much difficulty. He was young and not particularly careful, positioned at the corner of the adjacent building with his arms folded, watching the front door. Cole came in from the east without hurry and covered the 20 yards between them before the man heard him, and when the man turned, it was to find Cole's hand already on his collar, and Cole's voice already in his ear, low and pleasant and absolute. "You're going to sit down right here and stay quiet," Cole said, "and in about an hour, someone is going to come find you and let you know it's time to go home. And you're not going to do anything between now and then that makes me regret being this decent about it." The man sat down. He was perhaps 19 years old and frightened, and Cole felt the full, familiar weight of the truth that most men doing bad work were not bad men. They were young or poor or afraid, and they had found themselves in the service of someone who had made it costly to be anything else. He left the young man sitting against the building and went through the lean-to window at the east side of Ruth Calloway's house. Inside the house had the quality of a place where someone had left in a hurry and not come back, a cup still on the table, a book open to a half-read page, the small, ordinary details of a life interrupted. Cole moved through it without lighting a lamp, using the faint moonlight that came through the windows. He found the main room, counted the floorboards from the hearth the way Agnes had described, found the loose one, worked it up. The box was there. He worked the hinge as Agnes had said. Patient, careful, his fingers remembering similar work in similar darkness. The clasp gave. Inside, he found what Agnes had promised Ruth Calloway's ledger, meticulous and complete, 4 years of the school's finances, recorded in a clear, precise hand that communicated at every line the character of a woman who knew her records would someday need to speak for her. Every family, every payment, every charitable arrangement documented not as charity, but as community contribution, as if Ruth had understood that the language of accounting carried a dignity that the language of pity did not. And at the back of the ledger, folded carefully, a letter, dated 8 months ago, addressed to the County Education Board. Ruth's handwriting, but the tone of it different from the ledger, not accounting but appealing, laying out with clear-eyed and unemotional precision the situation in Redstone Creek, the pressure from Pickett's people, the departure of the doctor, and then the Reverend, the climate of intimidation that she had observed building over 3 years. She had asked the county board to look into the school's status and the broader situation in the town. She had sent it carefully and formally, and received in return, she had noted in small letters at the bottom of the folded page, no reply. Cole stood in the dark of Ruth Calloway's house and held the letter and felt the full particular anger of someone who has found evidence that a person called for help and was ignored, which is a different and heavier anger than finding evidence of cruelty, because cruelty can be fought, but indifference just sits there and accumulates. He took the ledger and the letter and replaced the floorboard and went back out through the east window. The young man was still sitting against the building. Cole looked at him. "Go home," he said. "Don't go back tomorrow or Pickett tonight. Whatever they're paying you, it's not worth being in the middle of what's coming." He looked at the young man steadily. "You've got a choice right now that you won't have tomorrow. That's not a threat. That's just how these things go." The young man swallowed. "What's coming?" he asked. "Morning," Cole said, and left. He was back at the marshal's office 20 minutes later. Hayes had finished the letter, 3 pages official seal, signed with the heavy signature of a man who had decided to mean it. Jesse Carr was there, 24 years old, and bright-eyed, and clearly someone who had been waiting a long time for something real to do. He looked at the documents Cole added to the packet with the focus of a young man who understood instinctively that he was being handed something important. "You ride south," Cole said. "You don't stop in any town between here and the county seat. You don't tell anyone where you're going or what you're carrying. You get to Judge Aldous, and you put this directly into his hands, and you wait for a written response." He looked at Jesse. "Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Jesse said. No hesitation. The answer of someone who had been yes-sirring the wrong requests for long enough that saying it to a right one felt like relief. After Jesse rode out into the dark, Cole and Hayes stood in the office in a quiet that was different from earlier. Not the quiet of avoidance, but the quiet of two men who have committed to something and are now inside it. "Pickett will move in the morning," Hayes said. "He'll want to resolve this before any official inquiry can get traction. He can't afford a county investigation. There are too many things it would find." He turned his hat in his hands. "He'll come himself this time. He doesn't usually show his face directly, but this is different. This has gotten public." "Good," Cole said. Hayes looked at him. "You want him to come?" "I want him visible," Cole said. "I want him in this street, doing what he does in front of people who've only ever seen the polished version of him. People who've accepted his version of things because they've never seen the real one up close." He looked at Hayes. "When a man like Pickett steps into the open because he's angry, he shows everyone what he actually is, and people see things differently once they've seen that." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Tom Briggs," he said. "You said Agnes mentioned him. You should talk to him tonight." "I was going to," Cole said. "Tell him." Hayes stopped, started again. "Tell him that the marshal asked for him. Tell him I said his name in a room where it mattered. If that means anything to him after all this time, he'll know what it means." Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "What happened to you in this town, Hayes, didn't have to happen. You should know that." Hayes absorbed it. "I know that now," he said. "Didn't know it when it mattered." "You know it now," Cole said. "That's what tonight is." Tom Briggs answered the door of the feed store's back living quarters in his undershirt, with a lamp in his hand, and the expression of a man who had not been sleeping anyway. He was broad and weathered and somewhere in his 50s, and when he saw Cole on his doorstep, he looked past him reflexively, the checking glance of someone who had learned that visitors at night sometimes brought company they didn't announce. "You alone?" Briggs said. "Yes," Cole said. Briggs looked at him a beat longer. Then he stepped back and let him in. Cole told him what had happened with Ruth Calloway in the street that morning. He told him about the documents going to the county seat and the letter Hayes had signed. He told him about Tom's own name in the file, that the testimony he'd given 3 years ago and been pressured away from was still there in writing, was on its way to Judge Aldous in the hands of a writer who had already left. Tom Briggs listened to all of it without speaking. His wife had appeared in the doorway from the back room, and he'd looked at her once, and she'd stayed there listening too. When Cole finished, Briggs sat back in his chair and blew out a long breath through his nose. "You know what Pickett's going to do when he finds out that Ryder left," he said. "Yes," Cole said. "And you're staying." "Yes." "Why?" Not the same question Eli had asked, not the boy's honest wondering. This was the question of a man who had been burned and needed to understand the math before he stepped forward again. "Because Ruth Calloway nearly died in this street today," Cole said, "and nobody did anything about it. And she's got a son who held on for 3.5 hours alone, and that boy shouldn't have had to be alone." He looked at Briggs evenly. "And because the next time Pickett does this to someone in this town, and there will be a next time, if nothing changes, it won't be a woman who nearly gets buried. It'll be someone who does." Briggs's wife made a small sound from the doorway. Briggs looked at his hands. "My father built this store," he said, not arguing, just saying it the way you say things when you're locating yourself. "He built it with wood he hauled from 30 miles east. He was here before Pickett, before any of this." He looked up. "This is my land." "I know," Cole said. "What do you need from me?" Briggs asked. Cole looked at him. "I need you to be willing to stand in this street tomorrow when Pickett comes and not look away." He let that settle. "That's all. Just don't look away. Because when people see one man not looking away, it's easier for the next man to do the same thing. And when enough men stop looking away..." He let it finish itself. Briggs looked at his wife. She looked back at him in the particular way of two people who have been together long enough that the conversation happens faster than words. Something passed between them. She gave one small nod. Briggs turned back to Cole. "I'll be there," he said. "And I'll bring the Yates brothers. They've been waiting for a reason." Cole stood. "Thank you," he said simply and without performance. He walked back to Agnes's boarding house through the full dark of midnight. Redstone Creek was quiet around him, the deep quiet of a place that didn't know yet what morning was going to ask of it. He went inside, and Agnes was awake in her chair, and Eli was asleep on the floor, with his hand still touching his mother's, and Ruth Calloway was breathing steadily, really steadily now, the breathing of someone coming back from a long distance, rather than going away to one. Cole sat in the chair across from Agnes, and for a while, neither of them said anything. Then Agnes said very quietly. She squeezed his hand. Cole looked at Eli, at the small hand touching his mother's. "When?" he asked. "About an hour ago," Agnes said. "Just once. Just briefly, but deliberate." She looked at Ruth's face. "She knows he's there." Cole looked at Ruth Calloway, at the schoolteacher who had written a letter to a county board that never answered, who had hidden her records under a floorboard, because she knew they'd be needed someday, who had shown up at her door with her evidence in hand, even when the men tearing it away outweighed and outgunned her. He thought about the kind of person who built a school with her own money in a town that wouldn't fund it, who charged the families that could pay, and taught the ones that couldn't anyway, who understood that the language of accounting carried a dignity that pity did not. He thought about what she was going to wake up to. And then he thought about what Pickett was going to ride into in the morning and what he was going to find when he got there, and for the first time since riding into Redstone Creek, something very close to resolve settled through Cole Harlan like a cold, clean current straightening everything it touched. He was still sitting there when Ruth Calloway opened her eyes. Her eyes opened slowly, the way eyes open when the body has been somewhere very far away and is not entirely sure it made it back. Agnes was on her feet before Cole had fully registered what was happening. She moved to the cot with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had decided how she would handle it well in advance. She put one hand gently on Ruth's shoulder and leaned down and said quietly and clearly, "You're safe. You're in my boarding house. You're safe." Ruth's eyes moved. They were unfocused at first, traveling the ceiling, tracking nothing. And then they found Agnes's face, and something shifted in them, a gathering, a coming together of pieces. "Agnes," she said. Her voice was barely there, a thread of sound. "Right here," Agnes said. "Right here, honey." Ruth's eyes moved again, searching. Cole watched her face as the search became more urgent, as the gathering behind her eyes sharpened from confusion into a very specific and immediate need. "Eli," she said. And the boy woke up. He went from asleep to upright in a single motion, the way children do when they've been sleeping with one part of themselves already standing guard. His hand found his mother's hand before his eyes were fully open. When he saw her face looking back at him, actually looking, actually there, actually finding him something in Eli Calloway that had been braced for 3.5 hours, and then through a whole long night finally completely let go. He didn't say anything. He put his forehead down against the back of her hand, and his shoulders shook, and he made no sound at all, which was somehow worse and better than any sound could have been. Ruth's hand turned. Her fingers closed around his. Weak, but certain. The grip of someone returning. "I'm here," she said. Still, barely a voice. But present. Absolute. "I'm right here, baby." Cole stood up from his chair and walked to the window and looked out at the dark street and gave them the only thing he had available to give, which was the privacy of his turned back. Agnes caught his eye from across the room and gave him a look that said she understood and approved, which from Agnes Porter was worth something. It was a few minutes before Ruth spoke again. When she did, her voice was marginally stronger, still fragile, still careful, but building. "How long?" she asked. "Since yesterday morning," Agnes said. "It's past midnight now." Ruth absorbed that. Her eyes moved around the room, taking stock the eyes of a methodical woman even in this state. They found Cole at the window and rested there. He turned when he felt it. She looked at him with the particular directness of a woman who had been through something terrible and come out the other side still entirely herself. "You're the one," she said. Not a question. "I'm Cole Harlan, ma'am," he said. "Agnes told me about you," Ruth said. Cole glanced at Agnes. Agnes's expression was serenely uninformative. "I was only gone 20 minutes, he said. "Agnes talks fast when it matters," Ruth said. And there was something in the way she said it, dry quiet, the cadence of a woman who knew her friend well, that told Cole more about Ruth Calloway's character than an hour of description would have. She was in pain, she was weak, and she was entirely present. "You need to rest," Cole said. "I need to know what's happening," she said. "Eli." She looked at her son. "Tell me." Eli wiped his face with the back of his hand and straightened and told her. He told it well clearly, in order without dramatizing, which was remarkable for a 9-year-old telling the story of the worst day of his life. He told her about the men coming to carry her away, about standing over her, about Cole checking for her pulse. He told her about Deke Morrow and the confrontation in the street. He told her about Hayes and the files, and Jesse Carr riding south. Ruth listened to all of it without interrupting. Her face moved through things, not performance, just the real movements of a person receiving real information. When Eli mentioned the ledger, something in her expression tightened. "The box," she said. "My records." "I have them," Cole said. "They're with the documents Hayes sent to the county. You were right to keep them. The letter you wrote to the education board is with them too." Ruth went very still. "I wrote that letter 8 months ago," she said slowly. "I know. They didn't answer you." Her jaw tightened. "No, they didn't." She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Cole. "Pickett has someone in the county office, a clerk who flags correspondence from Redstone Creek. I suspected it, but I couldn't prove it." Her eyes sharpened. "That's why the doctor left. He wrote a formal complaint about intimidation to the county health board. 2 weeks later, Pickett's men came to his office and broke every piece of equipment he owned. He left the next morning." She paused. "The Reverend wrote a letter too, to the diocese." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Jesse Carr's writing with the documents directly to Judge Aldous," Cole said. "Bypassing the county office entirely. Hand delivery." Ruth looked at him steadily. "You thought of that," she said. "Hayes helped." Something crossed Ruth's face at Hayes's name, complicated and human, the expression of a person revising a settled judgment. Not entirely, but partially. Enough to be honest. "Denton Hayes used to be a decent man," she said, "before Pickett got to him." "He might be again," Cole said. Ruth considered that. Then she said carefully, "What time will Pickett come?" Cole had been waiting for this, not because he'd expected it, but because he had spent the night building toward it, and he recognized in Ruth Calloway's question the mind of a woman who had also spent a long time thinking clearly in difficult circumstances. She was not asking whether Pickett would come. She knew he would come. She was asking when, which was the question of someone making a plan. "Morning," Cole said. "He'll want daylight. He does things publicly when he can. It's how he maintains control. He wants the town to see." He paused. "But this time, the town seeing is going to work against him." "You've spoken to Tom Briggs," Ruth said. Cole looked at her. "Agnes really does talk fast." "Tom's been wanting a reason for 2 years," Ruth said. "His father built that store. He's not going anywhere, and he knows it, and Pickett knows it, and it's been a stalemate." Her voice was gaining strength as she used it the way a machine warms to its work. "The Yates brothers won't need much. They're stubborn men, both of them. Stubborn is useful when the stubbornness has been pointed at the right thing." "That's what I thought," Cole said. Ruth looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. It was not gratitude or not only gratitude. It was something more like recognition, the look of someone finding a thing they'd stopped expecting to find. "You've been doing this all night," she said. "You rode in yesterday noon, and you didn't know a single person in this town, and you've been doing all of this all night." "You and your son had a problem that needed solving," Cole said. "Lots of people have problems that need solving," Ruth said. "They don't all find someone willing to solve them." Cole didn't answer that. He looked at Eli, who had settled back beside the cot, with his mother's hand still in his, and the exhausted, grounded expression of a boy who had been carrying something enormous and had finally been allowed to set it down. "He didn't let them," Cole said. "All morning on his own against 6 grown men. He didn't let them." Ruth looked at her son. The thing that moved across her face then had no name adequate to it. She reached out with her free hand and touched Eli's hair, and he leaned into it the way children do when they've been strong for so long that being touched by their mother is almost too much to bear. "I know," she said softly. "I heard him. I couldn't answer, but I heard him the whole time." She looked at Eli directly. "I heard every word you said to me, baby." Eli looked up at her. "Even the part about the rabbit," he said, with the slightly mortified expression of a child who has said private things believing they weren't being heard. Despite everything, despite the pain she was in, and the night she'd had, and the morning that was coming, Ruth Calloway laughed. It was small and brief, and it clearly cost her something, but it was real, and it changed the quality of the air in the room completely. Agnes Porter turned away to fiddle with something on the washstand, and Cole was fairly certain her shoulders were shaking slightly. Cole let it settle. Let the room have that moment which it had earned. Then he pulled his chair closer to the cot and sat down and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his voice low and serious. "Ruth," he said, "when Pickett comes in the morning, it would be better for everything if you weren't visible. You're still hurt. You need—" "No," Ruth said. Cole stopped. "I understand what you're saying," Ruth said, and her voice was steady and clear and left no room for negotiation. "And you're right that I'm hurt. But Ford Pickett has been operating in this town for 4 years on the assumption that the people he harms will stay quiet and stay out of sight because they're afraid or ashamed or simply too damaged to stand up." She held Cole's gaze. "I'm not going to be out of sight. Whatever I have to hold on to stay upright, I'll hold on to it. But I am not going to let the first thing this town sees tomorrow morning be that he put me somewhere I couldn't get up from." She paused. "Do you understand that—" Cole looked at her for a long moment. He thought about arguing. He thought about the very real medical concerns about head injuries and exertion and the considerable difference between being conscious and being well. He thought about all of that, and then he looked at her face, at the absolute inhabited certainty in it, the face of a woman who had been making hard decisions alone for a long time, and knew her own mind completely, and he let it go. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I understand that." Agnes turned back from the washstand. "She'll need help standing," she said practically. "And she's not going further than the doorway. Those are my terms." Ruth looked at Agnes with the look of a woman accepting conditions from the one person in the room who has earned the right to set them. "Your doorway," she said. "All right." The hours between midnight and dawn in a town waiting for something have a particular quality, long and slow and too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes small sounds enormous. Cole spent those hours moving. He went back to Tom Briggs briefly to confirm the morning. He walked the perimeter of the main street twice, marking positions, marking sightlines, marking the places where a man standing in the right spot could be seen from the most other places at once, because visibility was going to matter tomorrow in ways that had nothing to do with gunfighting and everything to do with what people chose to do when they could see each other doing it. He checked in on Hayes once around 3 in the morning. The marshal was awake at his desk with the 3 complaint files open in front of him, reading them over the way a man reads something he wrote a long time ago when he was a different version of himself. He looked up when Cole came in. "I've been thinking about what I'm going to say to him," Hayes said. "To Pickett. When he comes. You don't have to say anything, Cole said. You just have to be there. I want to say something, Hayes said, quiet and definite. I've had a lot of years of saying nothing. I'd like to use tomorrow for something different. Cole looked at him. Then you will, he said. He went back to Agnes's boarding house before dawn and sat in the chair across from the cot, and in the thin gray light that came before sunrise, he watched Ruth Calloway sleep. Actually sleep now. Real sleep. The body doing the necessary urgent work of recovery. And he sat with the particular stillness of a man who has done what can be done before a hard thing and is now simply waiting for it. He thought about what Agnes had said. That he'd been a lawman once. That something had happened. He thought about the case that had ended it, the family in Caldwell County, the evidence he'd gathered with absolute precision that had been excluded on a procedural error he hadn't made and couldn't correct the verdict that came back wrong. The man who had walked free and the family that had been left with nothing, and Cole, who had done everything right and held a result he couldn't live inside. He thought about the 18 months after moving from town to town, doing odd work, not stopping anywhere, learning to need nothing, learning to pass through. He thought about a boy in the middle of a street, arms spread wide over his mother refusing. Eli woke up around 5. He came to full alertness, quickly checked his mother's face, checked her breathing, and then looked at Cole with the eyes of a child who has spent a day and a night operating at the outer edge of his capacity and is running on something that isn't quite energy anymore, but is refusing to stop. You should sleep more, Cole said. Can't, Eli said. He settled with his back against the cot leg. Are you scared? He asked. Cole thought about giving a simpler answer. Some, he said. Eli nodded like this was useful information. My mama says being scared is just your body telling you something matters, he said. She says it's only a problem if you let it do the deciding. Cole looked at the boy. Your mama sounds like she's worth listening to, he said. She knows a lot, Eli said with the matter-of-fact conviction of a child who has not yet learned to underestimate his mother, and if Cole had any say in the surrounding circumstances, was not going to start today. She taught me how to read when I was 4. She says reading is how you make sure no one can make you believe a lie. He was quiet a moment. She says the most dangerous thing a person can do to you is make you doubt what you know is true. Cole sat with that. Outside, the sky had begun its shift toward morning, that long, slow, gray-to-pink change that happens at the edge of every hard day, whether the day deserves the beauty or not. Ford Pickett arrived at 7 in the morning. Cole heard the horses first, more of them than yesterday, moving at a walk unhurried, the deliberate pace of a man who controls his entrance. He was at the window. He counted 8 riders, and in the middle of them, on a bay horse that was considerably better kept than anything else in Redstone Creek, a man in a dark coat and a clean hat who sat very straight in the saddle and looked at the town around him with the proprietary ease of someone surveying what he owns. Ford Pickett was not what Cole had expected. He was 60s, maybe silver-haired, with a broad, pleasant face, and the kind of groomed, careful presentation that required money and attention. He looked like a banker, which was partly what he was. He looked like a man who had never in his life been obliged to do anything distasteful with his own hands, which was entirely what he was. Cole put his hat on, turned to Agnes. It's time, he said. Agnes was already at the cot. Ruth had been awake for an hour, had refused broth and accepted water, and had spent the last 30 minutes doing the quiet work of gathering herself back into her full height, which was considerable even lying down. Agnes helped her sit up, then helped her to standing, slow and careful, one hand firm at Ruth's elbow. Ruth's face went tight with pain, but she stood, and she straightened, and she breathed through it, and then she looked at Cole with clear, steady eyes. All right, she said. Eli was at her other side, immediately, his shoulder under her hand, without being asked, which made Agnes look away again for a moment. Cole went out first. He stepped off the porch of Agnes's boarding house and into the morning street, and stopped the same way he had stopped yesterday, and let Ford Pickett's procession come to him. Pickett saw him and didn't react, which meant he'd been told about Cole in advance, which meant Deke Morrow had reported thoroughly. Pickett pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet out and looked down at Cole with the expression of a man who finds an unexpected obstacle mildly interesting rather than concerning. His 8 riders spread out on either side of him. Deke Morrow was among them. His eyes found Cole immediately and stayed there with the focused, contained attention of a man who has been thinking about a specific person since yesterday and has reached some conclusions. "Mr. Harlan, is it?" Pickett said. His voice was good warm and measured the voice of a man who had used it as a primary tool for decades. "I understand you had quite a day yesterday." "Had a day," Cole agreed. "I also understand there's been some confusion," Pickett said, "about a financial matter involving the Calloway family. I want you to know I'm here personally to clear that up. The last thing I want is for anyone in this community to feel—" "Mr. Pickett," Cole said. Pickett stopped. He was not a man who got interrupted often. He handled it smoothly, a slight pause, a slight adjustment, the face remaining pleasant. "Yes. The documents proving Ruth Calloway owes you nothing are already in Judge Aldis's hands," Cole said, "along with 3 formally suppressed complaints from residents of this town, signed and filed under the Marshal's seal, and a letter from Marshal Hayes requesting a county investigation." He let that land. "Jesse Carr's a fast rider. He left at midnight. The county seat's 2 days out, but Aldis sometimes works early." Something moved behind Pickett's eyes. Not panic, he was too controlled for panic, but a rapid, significant recalculation. His pleasant expression didn't change, but its quality shifted the way still water shifts when something moves beneath it. "That's a serious accusation," Pickett said. "It's a serious documentation," Cole said. "There's a difference." Pickett looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past Cole, reading the street, and what he read there made the recalculation behind his eyes move faster. Because Tom Briggs was standing in the doorway of his feed store, with his arms at his sides and his jaw set. Because the Yates brothers, both of them broad and weathered and planted like they'd grown, they were standing in front of their wagon outside the general store. Because Marshal Hayes had come out of his office and was walking slowly and steadily up the middle of the street toward the group, and he had his badge on and his back straight, and the look of a man who had remembered something important about himself overnight. And because behind Cole, Agnes Porter's boarding house door had opened, and Ruth Calloway had stepped out onto the porch. She was holding the door frame with one hand, and Agnes was beside her, and Eli was at her other side, his shoulders still under her hand steady as a post. She was pale, and the pain was visible in the set of her jaw and the careful way she held herself. But she was standing. She was looking at Ford Pickett with the clear, direct eyes of a woman who had built a school from nothing and kept records under a floorboard and written a letter to people who didn't answer, and stood at her own door with evidence in her hand even when they tore it away and she was standing. The street went very quiet. Ford Pickett looked at Ruth Calloway standing on Agnes Porter's porch, and Cole watched Pickett's face as the man who had operated in Redstone Creek for 4 years on the assumption that the people he harmed would stay out of sight, received the information that this one would not, and that she was not alone, and that the street around her had people in it, who were looking at him and not looking away. The pleasant expression didn't disappear, but it thinned. "Quite a production," Pickett said mostly to himself. "No production," Cole said. "Just people standing in their own town." Pickett sat on his horse and looked at the street and did the thing that men like him do when the ground shifts. He recalculated. Cole could see it happening behind the pleasant face, behind the silver hair and the clean hat and the decades of practiced ease. The man was not stupid. Stupid men didn't build what Pickett had built, didn't hold a town the way he'd held this one. He was calculating odds the way he always calculated odds, which was with the cold arithmetic of someone who had always made sure the numbers were in his favor before he acted. What he was calculating now was whether they still were. "Mr. Harlan," Pickett said, and his voice had shifted slightly, still measured, still warm, but with something underneath it now that hadn't been there before, a current of something that wasn't quite threat and wasn't quite respect, but lived in the territory between. You're a man passing through. I understand that, and I appreciate what you did for the Calloway family truly. That was decent work. He spread one hand open, a gesture of reasonableness. But you don't know the full history of this town. You don't know the arrangements that have been made, the debts that keep the roads maintained, and the creek access open and the mill running. You don't know what this town looks like without those arrangements. I know what it looks like with them, Cole said. Pickett's pleasant expression held. There are always growing pains in a developing territory, he said. Misunderstandings. I'm sorry for what happened to Mrs. Calloway. Genuinely. That was not sanctioned. He looked past Cole toward the porch, toward Ruth. Mrs. Calloway, I hope you know that the men responsible for your injury will be dealt with appropriately. You have my word on that. Ruth's voice came from the porch behind Cole, steady and clear in the morning air. Your word, Mr. Pickett, she said, is not a currency this town can afford to keep spending. Something moved through the gathered people on the street, not a sound, but a feeling. The collective intake of breath of a group of people who had spent a long time not saying the thing that had just been said out loud. Tom Briggs shifted his weight in the doorway of his feed store. One of the Yates brothers cleared his throat. Hayes, still walking up the center of the street, slowed briefly and then continued. Pickett looked at Ruth for a long moment. Then he looked back at Cole. You've stirred things up, he said. I'll give you that. The warmth in his voice was thinning now, the performance requiring more effort. But one letter to Judge Aldis doesn't dismantle 4 years of legal agreements. The county has its processes. Investigations take time. And in that time, this town still has to function. The town will function, Cole said. It just won't be doing it on your terms anymore. Deke Morrow moved. Not dramatically, just a shift of his horse, a repositioning that brought him 2 feet forward and slightly to the left of Pickett, the movement of a man getting himself into a better position. His eyes had never left Cole. Cole tracked the movement without appearing to the way he tracked all movement now, automatically, a reflex built over years that never fully switched off. Hayes reached the edge of the group. He stopped 6 feet from Pickett's horse and looked up at the man on it and said, Ford. Just the name. No title. No sir. Just the name of a man he had let operate for too long in a town he was paid to protect. His voice was rough, and it wasn't steady, but it was there, and being there was the whole thing. Pickett looked down at Hayes with the expression of a man looking at something that used to be reliable. Denton, he said, I hope you've thought carefully about what you're involving yourself in here. I've thought about it since midnight, Hayes said. It took me that long to remember something. He paused. I took an oath. Long time ago. I'd like to try honoring it before I'm too old to try. One of Pickett's riders laughed, a short dismissive sound. Pickett himself didn't. He looked at Hayes with something that might have been briefly a version of respect, or at least the recognition of someone who had been underestimated and turned out to be standing upright after all. You understand that letter goes both ways, Pickett said to Hayes. An official investigation looks at everyone. I know that, Hayes said. I filed a full accounting of what I suppressed and why. It's with the documents Carr is carrying. He held Pickett's gaze. I'm not trying to come out of this clean, Ford. I'm trying to come out of it honest. Those are different things. The street held that. Let it breathe. Cole felt the weight of the moment, the specific weight of a man publicly admitting his own failure, not as confession, but as action, which was the only kind of admission that meant anything. He had not expected Hayes to be this far along this morning. He had underestimated the man, and being wrong about someone in the direction of underestimating them was the most satisfying kind of being wrong there was. Pickett looked at the street, at Briggs, at the Yates brothers, at Hayes standing in the road, at Ruth on the porch with her son at her side, at Cole, who had not moved and was not going to move. The calculation was finishing. Cole could see it finishing. Then Deke Morrow pulled his gun. It was not a warning shot, and it was not directed at the sky. It was leveled at Cole, fast and clean, the draw of a man who had been waiting for an excuse and had decided not to wait for one any longer. "Enough," Deke said. His voice had none of Pickett's warmth and none of his care. It was the voice of a man who preferred things simple and had been sitting through a complicated morning. "You want to talk about documents and judges and oaths? Fine. But what happens right here, right now on this street, that's what this is about." He looked at Cole down the barrel. "Walk away, Harlan. Get on your horse and ride out, and none of the rest of this morning needs to get worse than it already is." The street froze. Cole looked at the gun, at Deke's face behind it, at the 7 other riders who had variously shifted and tensed, reading Morrow's move, deciding what it meant about what they were supposed to do. He looked at Pickett, who had gone very still on his horse with an expression that was not approval and was not surprise, but was the expression of a man watching a situation leave his control while calculating whether he can recover it. "Deke," Pickett said quietly. "He needs to walk away," Deke said, not looking at Pickett. "We can sort the paperwork later. Right now he needs to walk away." "Deke!" Pickett's voice carried a specific note, not an order, but close. The note of a man who understands that a gun in the open street on a morning with this many witnesses is a different problem from a gun in a dark doorway at 9 at night. Deke didn't lower his weapon. Cole stood very still. His hands were at his sides. He did not reach for his gun. This surprised Deke. He could see that a subtle confusion moving through the man's focused expression, because Cole's stillness was the wrong response, and Deke didn't know what to do with the wrong response. "You going to draw?" Deke asked. "Not right now," Cole said. "Then you're going to get shot." "Maybe," Cole said. "But then you're going to have shot an unarmed man in front of every person in this town on the morning that a county investigator is already riding toward Redstone Creek." He held Deke's gaze. "You want to think about whether Pickett lets you take that fall alone." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Cole had heard since he'd ridden into Redstone Creek. He watched Deke Morrow's face. He watched the man's grip on the gun, which was steady, and his eyes, which were not. Because Cole had named the thing that Deke had been not thinking about, had put it into words in front of witnesses, and now it sat between Deke and Pickett like something solid, and both men felt it, and the 7 other riders felt it, and every person in the street felt it. Pickett cleared his throat. "Deke," he said, "put it down." Deke's jaw went hard. He looked at Pickett. Something passed between them. The communication of men who have operated together long enough to have a shorthand, and the shorthand right now said that Pickett was cutting losses, and Deke was the loss being cut, and Deke understood it and hated it and couldn't change it. The gun came down. Cole breathed out. Once. Slow. Then he looked at Pickett and said, "You should go home, Mr. Pickett. Judge Aldous is a thorough man. He's going to want to talk to you in a proper setting with proper documentation in front of him, and you're going to want to have a lawyer present for that conversation. I'd suggest using the time between now and then preparing for it." Pickett looked at Cole for a long moment. Then he looked at the street, one full slow survey, the look of a man saying goodbye to something he'd believed was entirely his. His eyes went to Ruth on the porch, and stayed there for 3 seconds. Then he pulled his horse around. He rode out of Redstone Creek at the same deliberate walk he'd ridden in with, and his 8 riders went with him, and Deke Morrow went last, and kept his back very straight and his eyes forward, and Cole watched them until the north road took them past the tree line, and they were gone. The street exhaled. Tom Briggs walked out of his doorway into the street, fully both feet on the road. He looked at Cole, and he looked at Hayes, and then he looked at Ruth on the porch, and he took his hat off and held it against his chest and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say, and he knew it. The elder Yates brother put his hand on his brother's shoulder. The younger one nodded once. Hayes stood in the middle of the road with his arms at his sides and his head slightly bowed, not in defeat, but in the particular posture of a man receiving something absolution or reckoning, or both, the distinction blurring at that hour in that light. Cole turned around. Ruth was still on the porch. She was holding the door frame, and she was pale, and the pain was in her face, and she was entirely upright, looking at the place where Ford Pickett had been, with eyes that were dry and steady, and fully awake. Eli was against her side with his shoulder under her hand, and he was watching Cole walk back toward them with an expression that Cole felt somewhere he didn't usually let things reach. Cole stepped up onto the porch. He stopped in front of them. He looked at Ruth, and then at Eli, and then back at Ruth. "You should lie back down," he said. "In a minute," she said. Her voice was still thin, but her eyes were not. "I wanted to see it." "You saw it." "I needed to see it," she said. And the distinction mattered, and he understood it. She looked at him with the particular directness she'd had since she opened her eyes in the dark boarding house and found him sitting in the chair across the room. "What happens now?" "Aldous will send someone within the week," Cole said. "Probably a deputy marshal from the county, someone with authority to conduct a formal interview and review the documents. It'll take time. These things always take time. But Pickett's exposed now. The suppressed complaints, the intimidation your records against his false ledger. He's a careful man, and he'll lawyer up, and he'll try to manage it, but he can't manage an investigation with real documentation and real witnesses who aren't afraid anymore." He paused. "Hayes's testimony is going to matter most. A sitting marshal on record about what he saw and what he suppressed and why that's not something Pickett can buy his way around easily." Ruth absorbed all of that. Then she said, "The school should reopen," Cole said. "Once you're able." "I'll be able before the week is out," she said. Agnes made a sound from just inside the doorway that was technically not an argument, but communicated significant skepticism. "A few days," Ruth amended with the slight relenting of a woman who picks her battles. Then she looked at Cole with a question she hadn't asked yet in her face, and he could see her deciding whether to ask it and then deciding yes. "Where do you go from here?" she asked. Cole had been expecting the question and had not been expecting how it would feel to receive it. He looked down the empty street of Redstone Creek, the feed store, the general store, the boarding house, the shuttered doctor's office that would need a doctor again, the church that would need a reverend again, the small white building 2 streets over that he had not been inside but knew was Ruth's school. He thought about 17 towns he'd passed through before this one, about the particular emptiness of passing through. "I don't know yet," he said. "Honest." Ruth looked at him. "This town is going to need people," she said. "Not someone to fix it. I want to be clear that this town is going to fix itself because it has to, and because it can. But people." She paused carefully. "The kind who stay." Cole looked at her. He looked at Eli, who was watching this conversation with enormous intentional neutrality, the studied non-expression of a 9-year-old who has decided very strongly not to influence something he wants very much. "I'll think on it," Cole said. "That's all I'm asking," Ruth said. Agnes came out onto the porch and put her arm around Ruth's waist with brisk, affectionate firmness. "Right. Thinking is done outside. You are done outside. Inside now." She looked at Cole over Ruth's head with an expression that said, "This conversation will continue, but not today, and you should let that be enough for today," which Cole thought was probably the wisest thing he'd heard in Redstone Creek so far, and that was saying something. He stepped down from the porch to let them pass. Ruth went leaning on Agnes and moving carefully, and at the door she paused and looked back at Cole once. Just looked. He held it. Then she went inside. Eli stayed on the porch. He stood there looking at Cole with his torn shirt and his one missing boot, and his face that had been through more in 36 hours than most grown men managed in a year. Cole looked back at him. "You doing all right?" Cole asked. "Yes, sir," Eli said. Then, after a brief pause, "No, kind of." He looked at the ground and then back up. "I keep thinking about yesterday morning, when they were going to—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't checked." Cole looked at the boy steadily. "But I did check," he said. "But what if you hadn't stopped? What if you'd kept riding?" Cole thought about that. He thought about his horse slowing, without him asking about the sound of a child's voice in the street, about the 17 reasons he'd had to keep riding and the one he hadn't. "I don't know," he said. "I almost did." Eli looked at him with the directness that was so much like his mother's, it was startling. "Why didn't you—" Cole was quiet for a moment. He thought about what to say, and decided that a boy who had done what Eli had done deserved the truth of it rather than the simplified version. "Because you were fighting," he said. "And I've seen a lot of people in situations like yours, and most of them stop fighting before they should. You didn't stop. And something about that—" He paused. "Something about that made it impossible to keep riding." Eli absorbed this. "So I saved her," he said. Not boastfully, just working it out. By not letting go. "I saved her." "You did?" Cole said. "And then you kept going, and you didn't stop." Eli looked down at his one bare foot, then up at Cole. "I was really scared," he said. "I know." "The whole time." "I know," Cole said. "That's what made it brave." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If you stay—" He stopped himself, started again. "My mama's going to need help, with the school and the house and—" He was looking very hard at a point somewhere past Cole's shoulder. "I'd learn fast. If you showed me things, I learn fast." Cole looked at the boy, at the careful, contained hope in his face, which was so carefully contained because he had learned in his 9 years that hope sometimes needed protecting. He thought about a school with real records and a locked box and a letter to a county board that hadn't answered. He thought about a town that had watched from cracked doors and was now standing in its own street. He thought about a woman who had opened her eyes in the dark, and the first thing she had done was look for her son. He thought about the fact that he had not taken his horse to the livery last night, that he had left it at the post outside Agnes's boarding house, saddled the way a man leaves his horse when he doesn't know yet how long he's staying, but hasn't decided to leave. He put his hand briefly on top of Eli's head, not patting, just resting, the way you rest your hand on something solid when you need to feel what solid is. "I reckon you do," he said. "Learn fast." Eli looked up at him. His face did what 9-year-old faces do when they receive something they've been hoping for. It tried very hard to stay neutral and failed completely. Cole picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the porch railing, settled it on his head, adjusted the brim once. He looked at the street at Hayes and Tom Briggs talking near the marshal's office heads, together the conversation of two men beginning to build something out of what they'd just torn down. At the Yates brothers sitting on their wagon, not leaving yet, talking quietly in the particular way of men who have stopped waiting and started deciding. At Agnes's boarding house with its door closed and a schoolteacher behind it doing the necessary work of coming back. He looked at all of it. Then he walked back to his horse, untied the reins from the post, and walked the horse slowly down to the livery at the south end of town. He did not ride out. He walked it in. Handed it to the livery boy with instructions for feed and water and a proper brush down the instructions of a man settling his animal for more than a night. The livery boy asked if he was in town for long, and Cole thought about the question for a moment and said, "A while." He walked back up the street in the morning light. 3 weeks later, the county deputy marshal arrived in Redstone Creek with 2 clerks and a letter from Judge Aldous, and spent 4 days interviewing residents, reviewing documents, and taking formal statements. Tom Briggs went in on the first morning and came out looking lighter than he had in years. The Yates brothers went together side by side, the way they did everything. Hayes spent an entire day in the deputy's temporary office and came out looking neither lighter nor heavier, but cleaner somehow, like a window that had been washed. He told Cole afterward that he'd said everything. All of it held nothing back, and Cole had said that was the right thing, and Hayes had said he knew, and they'd left it there. Ford Pickett never came back to Redstone Creek in the same capacity. The formal investigation into his business practices took months, as these things did, and the outcome was the kind of partial, imperfect system slow result that was not the clean justice of a simpler story, but was real enough to strip the false debt claims real enough to require the return of properties acquired under duress, real enough that the mill and the water rights came under county oversight, and the families who'd been squeezed had somewhere to take their cases. Deke Morrow left the territory entirely, which was the kind of resolution that was also real, even if it wasn't satisfying. The school reopened on a Monday 11 days after Ruth Calloway had stood on Agnes Porter's porch and refused to be invisible. She taught from a chair the first week, which Agnes had insisted upon, and Ruth had accepted with only minimal argument. By the third week, she was standing at the board again, chalk in hand, writing with the particular focused pleasure of a woman who had chosen her work and intended to keep doing it. Eli brought Cole to the school one afternoon after lessons. He wanted to show him something. He led Cole to the back of the single classroom where Ruth had mounted a wooden board on the wall, not a chalkboard, but a display board, and on it she'd pinned a piece of paper in her clear, precise hand. It said, "This school was built by this town, for this town, and it belongs to every child in it, regardless of what their family can pay." She wrote that after, Eli said, after everything. He looked at the paper. She said she wanted it where everybody could see it the first day. Cole read it. Then he said, "That sounds like her. She says things like that." Eli said with the tone of a child who has accepted that his mother will always be slightly larger than ordinary life and has made his peace with this. She can't help it. Cole looked at the paper for another moment. Then he looked at the room. The small desks, the chalk-dusted board, the window with the afternoon light coming through it warm and long. The ordinary, extraordinary thing of a place where children came to learn what they didn't know yet. He thought about 18 months of moving. About towns that were the same shape as his absence. About the particular cold of a man who has decided that needing nothing is easier than needing something and losing it. He thought about a boy in a street with his arms spread wide over his mother, refusing to believe that the thing he loved most in the world was already gone. He thought about what it cost to hold on, and what it cost not to. Ruth appeared in the doorway of the classroom. She'd heard them come in. She leaned in the doorframe and looked at Cole, looking at her board, and then she looked at Eli, who was making an extremely elaborate show of examining something very interesting on the opposite wall. And she smiled the specific smile of a woman who sees something clearly and chooses to say nothing about it, which was its own kind of statement. "Stay for supper," she said. Not a question, but with enough of a question's shape that it left room. The room she always left him, the room of a woman who had decided something, and was patient enough to wait for it to finish deciding itself. Cole looked at her in the doorway, at the chalk still on her fingers, and the steadiness in her eyes, and the life she had built in this town that was hers, that she had refused to let go of, that she had written down in precise records under a floorboard because she knew it would matter. "Yes, ma'am," he said, "I will." Outside, Redstone Creek went about its evening, the way towns go about their evenings when they have stopped being afraid, with the ordinary noise of people living the particular aliveness of a place that has decided what it is and means to stay that way. Hayes crossed the street to speak with Tom Briggs. A child ran past the window of the schoolhouse. Somewhere east, one of the Yates brothers was calling to the other over the flat land. The school door stood open to the evening air, and Cole Harlan, who had almost kept writing, sat down at the table in Ruth Calloway's kitchen and stayed.